Greetings and welcome to Grenfell MediaWatch Update. Today's edition we're going to call Meek Week Thieves Myth. And I want to start off really with the meek bit. What do I mean by meek? Well, last week again was a slow media week. So one of the stories that the media are kicking out quite a lot was that of the Grenfell survivors being this kind of petrified community that on Guy Fawkes Night, which is tonight, they'll be reliving the trauma. And it's quite nice that the media's sensitive towards the risk of that taking place. But while this care for the Grenfell survivors is very touching, Grenfell survivors aren't meek. Let's be very clear about that. They may be traumatised and have been through a horrific experience. But let's not try and paint them as kind of like, what's that term they use, snowflakes? Because that's a pejorative term, and they're certainly not that. Okay, so we dealt with the meek, let's deal with the weak. Now, do you remember when Theresa May made that statement that everyone's going to be rehoused in 3 weeks? Well, clearly that hasn't happened, and the government's looking at an embarrassment across the world. So the government is actually placing pressure on Kensington and Chelsea Council, and they in turn are placing pressure on the residents who live in the walkways. Now, the walkways is the space around Grenfell. Those who are affected, who can't live in that area anymore, or whose properties were waterlogged or damaged through the toxic poisoning in the air, and that's another issue that's not been addressed. But anyway, so what's the council doing? Well, because they see the residents as some kind of weak force without political power, they're redrafting their housing policy. Now, this redrafting of their housing policy is something that we've got to be very mindful of, because what they're actually in turn saying is that, look, unless you move back into these spaces which traumatised you, then what we're going to do is actually penalise you. We're going to either have reduced housing rights, or what we're going to say is that you made yourself intentionally homeless. Now, of course, the council is going to deny that, and that's the whole point of the 4-week consultation, to find out what people's views are on this. This is actually a political motivated decision. They don't actually care about the feelings and the well-being of the residents right now. So again, just a reminder, the weak aren't the residents, the weak's the government. Okay, so we've done the meek, we've done the weak, now let's do the thieves. And there've been 2 classes of thieves I want to report on. The first one is that character who pretended that he'd actually lived in Grenfell so he can claim £12,500. That in itself is bad enough, but what he did was went around giving a sob story about how he had lost his wife and his son. Now, he was a con man, a fraudster, and none of this actually took place. In fact, what he did was that he actually pretended he lived in flats in Grenfell, and the only reason why he was caught was because when they was asked for what number flat you lived in, he was given numbers of flats that didn't exist. But while this story is irritating from a human interest perspective, from a media watch perspective, it reveals other things. Almost every newspaper that covered this story spoke about the Grenfell Tower fraudster or the Grenfell conman. And we take issue at that. You see, by placing the 2 words in close proximity, you start to make an association between Grenfell and fraudster. And again, this is part of a strategy to demonise the communities. That conman, that waste of space, he had nothing to do with Grenfell. And it's wrong to conflate the 2 points together. Okay, so we've spoken about individual thieves. Let's talk about corporate thieves. Now, some of the residents are trying to get information out of the TMO about what they knew about the fire safetiness in Grenfell before the massacre took place. And the TMO are actually saying that they're a private entity, not a public body. They don't have to respond to freedom of information requests, which legally is correct. But morally, no. I think what we have to understand is that this is an act of corporate thuggery. I mean, when we hear about building contractors sitting on government advisory panels, the same building contractors that use the cladding, that approve things like cladding, are now going to also be making decisions about how to go forward in the future. That's when you need to get worried. When you all of a sudden no longer hear about the dangers of the toxic poisoning that took place when cyanide was released into atmosphere, how is that affecting residents even as we speak right now? These are all examples of corporate thuggery. So I want to close with the truth. And the truth is, the Grenfell survivors are not just victims, as the media would like to portray them. They're an active, thriving community, fighting for the basic necessities of any community.
Post-Grenfell, the thing that's changed is that the whole community has woken up, and as a whole, I believe, is demanding that These colleges, these libraries should be preserved for the community. They can't just come and dismantle what we hold dear. They can't just come and close the college down with no guarantees.
The Save Wellington College campaign that Channel 4 covered is an excellent example of some of the good works that they're doing and continuing to do. They're just basically looking for the same things that any community wants. Colleges, libraries, parks, schools, housing, decent housing. And the fact that Kim from the council would actually hide behind the growing demand for social housing as justification for actually taking the land away from the community college is quite despicable.
I see the potential on that side for social housing, not for posh houses or anything like that at all, which I think is being suggested. I'm just going to make a commitment to this, that we have as a borough a priority to provide additional social housing within the borough.
The culture that you promote is the same culture that brought Grenfell into being, because you don't listen, you don't care, and your body language, while everyone's been talking, says it all.
Whilst there are many in the media, politicians and unfortunately those in the public that would happily paint Grenfell survivors as meek, weak and a bunch of thieves, there are others in solidarity with the community. I'm talking about the Hillsborough community, who this week came down having published a report about the real lessons that are learned, the real lessons that led towards justice. There are many people on the side of the Grenfell survivors. They are not weak and they are not alone. So I'm going to close as usual and say, may the ancestors continue to guide and protect us. Ashe.